come to the end of this phase of our life, we find ourselves trying to remember the good times, trying to forget the bad times.
Welcome back to the swamp. Tonight, I decided to get into a topic that I haven't seen anybody else cover quite in this detail. And I figured that these stories would be a perfect intro into this series on the channel. Working in the field of death is definitely a job that takes a lot of bravery and guts. Seeing dead bodies and having to empty their fluids can definitely be something very creepy. These stories are from coroners, funeral operators, and more. I hope you enjoy them. My boyfriend is a funeral director and embalmer, but he mainly deals with the embalming side of the business. This event happened 2 days ago. For those of you who don't know, embalmers work weird hours. Basically, someone dies at a hospital, nursing home, or personal home, and either a coroner or a doctor pronounces them dead. Then, the funeral home is called to come pick up the body. This can literally be any time of the day. So, 2 days ago, my boyfriend gets a death call at 1 in the morning, meaning someone has died and he has to go embalm. Usually, when he has to go in late, I go with him. His job is pretty far, and I get overly worried with him being so far away, and I don't want him to fall asleep at the wheel. I really just sit in the car the whole time, but I have gone into the funeral home to use the bathroom. I've never noticed anything creepy about it, and neither has he. Anyway, this time, I couldn't go with him. So, he goes and gets the body and embalms it. He's completely alone on the property. After he finishes up the body, he goes into the funeral home to get some papers. As he is entering, he hears footsteps near the other entrance. His worry at this point is that someone has broken in, which had happened before. He cautiously moved forward and found no one near the door. He inspected the other rooms, and all was as it should be. Satisfied, he got his papers and was on his way back to the embalming room. He was standing in a rather large open area when he hears loud, rushing footsteps coming right at him. His eyes widened, but he saw nothing and no one. As the footsteps neared him, they took a right and went toward a set of stairs that led to a small apartment above the funeral home. He didn't hear anything on the stairs, but a moment later he heard noises from above. He locked everything and left. As he walked to his car, he felt that he had been followed out. He is really not a man who exaggerates. He called me soon after getting into the car to tell me everything, and during said, I heard a very high-pitched noise that sounded like a partial word. He also got a terrible cold chill all over his body. He said he kept glancing into his rearview mirror, expecting to see someone in his back seat, but nothing else happened that night. His two main co-workers are members of the family that has owned and run the funeral home for ages. No one has ever mentioned anything resembling ghostly activity. It is my suspicion that the spirit is one of the family members that worked there before dying. He doesn't bother his own relatives because he knows they belong there, but maybe he didn't like someone outside the family being there. I worked as an autopsy lab assistant at a local medical examiner's office on the night shift. This usually meant I was working alone at night between two freezers, stocked with the various bits and remains of individuals, unless a doctor needed to do some late-night autopsy for religious purposes, or an investigator or police officer needed to fingerprint a body. We only got those whose cause of death needed to be verified, and usually meant we got the, I guess you could say, interesting cases. Interesting job, so ask away. The ones that really annoyed or bothered me after a while. Annoyance is part of detachment and making it just a part of a job on my end. I'm seeing up to 100 fresh corpses a week. These individuals that were extremely obese, like taking 500 pounds or more. The one that sticks out is a woman that was 510 pounds and was hit by a car and ejected at high speeds and then hit by an 18-wheeler. Now, imagine 500 pounds of hamburger helper with large bits of organ and bone mixed in with a few chunks of leg and what was a fun bag to try to prep an x-ray for autopsy. Having to pull parts of a dude out of a bucket and piece him together like a macabre jigsaw puzzle was a very interesting second day as well. A suicide via crossbow was pretty cool as well, as you really don't see that every day. The most interesting that I can share was a murder via katana. We were all super interested to see what that looked like, and it turns out it was one perfect stroke between the ribs and the heart. No bones were hit, just the heart. We joked about a master ninja hunting the city for weeks after. There are much more crazy ones, but it would be way too easy to identify my area from then. The worst is always decomposing bodies and water finds. It is the worst smell of the bunch by far, and the spongy, soupy texture of bodies get from long time in aquatic environments is the absolute worst. They tend to burst everywhere when you cut them open too. It was a sad job most of the time, as we only got those who suffered a violent death that needed to be investigated. Lots of children and people that were clearly failed by society. For 3 years, and up until just recently, I owned and operated a funeral home business in Colorado. This historic building was rumored to be haunted, stemming from the most believed to be disturbing activities carried out by the previous owners. The building had been vacant 2 years prior to my acquisition of the property. I have been in the business for around 20 years now. I am 36, started very young. I have lived in funeral homes for much of my adult life and have never experienced any paranormal activity. However, that changed almost immediately upon moving into this building. I have several photos and will create a new post for each one of them. This one, the first, was a photo that I took while moving my stuff into the basement. About the creepiest pictures you can imagine, and it's the creepiest basement you can imagine as well. The things I found in my basement ended up making worldwide news, but I haven't shown my personal photos, which are completely unrelated to my findings in the basement. I searched for a platform to reveal them on, and until today had never heard of any place such as yours. This is a photo of a basic Walmart-style Stevie stand. After I moved in, over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I noticed that there seemed to be some sort of image beginning to appear on the back of it. With each trip down the elevator, organizing everything that I had, I noticed that an image began to appear. It appears to be 2 or 3 very clear faces. It remains just as it appears in the photo to this day. That was the special part of these photos that I took. Some of them were actually tangible objects that I still possess to this day. I've been told that my photos and objects are some of the most compelling evidence of the paranormal ever collected, especially because of the history behind the building and other occurrences that continued to happen over my 3 years here. I was recently forced to close the doors of my business due to the corruption at the county level. The coroner was colluding with my competition and what ended up being an unthinkably horrific body brokering scam. This is the real thing, real life, real paranormal. That building was not for the thin-skinned individual. I work in forensics, specifically as an entomologist. I extract insects from decomposing bodies to estimate the time of death or supplement existing evidence. It is a grotesque of an occupation, as you can imagine. The most odious cadaver was the partial skeleton remains of an 8-month pregnant mother who gave life to a plethora of maggots and botflies and moth larvae. were consuming her hair like monstrous funeral shrouds. The tiny bones of the baby were disintegrating under the unrelenting feasting of hand beetles as its flesh was too dry for maggots to find purchase. They preferred the malleable flesh of the mother's face and breasts. Observing the corpse, her exposed womb appeared to be giving birth. Many adult beetles were scuttling over her pubic bone and into the cradle of her pelvis. She was supine. Her limbs were not splayed in distress, but unfortunately, her expression was indiscernible due to the divots of botflies imbued in the flesh of her cheeks. Then I began my extraction. It was a drug-induced suicide, which encapsulated the tranquility of her and her child's death. A couple years ago, there was a murder that involved children. At the time, I worked at a funeral home that was sent to retrieve a body at 2 in the morning. My boyfriend came along as muscle help. He was also an employee. So after the bagging and loading up, we made our way to the office. When we got there, I was transferring the client to a box and finalizing paperwork when R came out of the cooler and said, "Do you know who that is in there?" He looked pretty shaken, and I remember thinking, oh no, a relative. When I entered the cooler, I saw the bodies of the children. I don't want to describe the condition they were in. I backed out of the cooler and began moaning as if I had been sucker punched. I had to get the hell out of there. Fast forward. I got home, barely, and took a shower to calm down. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop picturing them. My stomach turned non-stop. I got another call later that day to retrieve a body from a nursing home. I didn't have R with me that time. He had another job during the day, so away I went. The whole time, all I could think of was, how am I going to open that door again? I got the body and raced to the office to drop it off. When I got there, I stood at the entrance of the cooler for 20 minutes trying to build the courage just to open the door. Now, mind you all, I don't scare easily. I love that job at the funeral home, and I now work in a hospital where I'm surrounded by humanity's most horrible people and death and decay on a daily basis. When I opened the cooler door, I decided that I would just look at the floor as to avoid seeing the bodies. But that didn't work. I placed the body on the shelf and turned to leave, but was suddenly drawn to look at them. I had no control at this point. I did not want to look back. I really didn't, but I couldn't control it. When I stopped walking, I was standing between the husband and wife. Looking down on their faces, I could see them still, so clearly in my mind. I reached down slowly and touched her hair. It was beautiful, and I will never forget the way it draped off the edge of the table. This image is what I dream of the most. Her hair. I know it sounds strange, but even though her eyes were closed, I felt her looking back at me. She even seemed to be grinning at me. The husband did not give me the same feelings. When I looked at him, I felt pity. Pity and anger. Now, days I still see them all. I close my eyes at night and I see them. I take showers and I see them. I dream of them all. Mostly I dream of the mother. I think I related to them so much. She was my age and build. The last thing I want to get out is that I actually struggled with this situation. I cried all the time, and I would see a baby and cry. I would hear a baby and I would cry. I even had moments where I felt like I had been there when the murders had happened. I don't know how, but I felt very close to this case. I dreamed that I was the mother so many times, and I can't even count. I remember having a small breakdown in which I took the gun from my dresser and pulled the bullets out. My boyfriend R wanted to show me that it was harmless, and I didn't need to fear. It was so surreal to me. It is so hard to describe the feeling that I had been there, and it was so personal. Anyway, thank you for listening to my rant. I can't talk to my family about this stuff because they are very sensitive, and I don't have many friends. I'm still working on my licenses, so I'm not officially a funeral director and embalmer yet, but I've been going to the medical examiner's office to practice embalming with my school for several months now. The people we work on down there are not in very good shape, usually dead at least a month before we get to see them. Needless to say, it's not a one-artery, low-formaldehyde job. Each week, we raise a minimum of 6 arteries, both carotids, both femorals, and both axillaries. Plus, the 2 radials if there's some trouble getting fluid distribution to the hands and forearms. To put this into perspective, a typical funeral home case would only need 1, maybe 2 arteries depending on the embalmer's preference. There aren't a lot of creepy or bizarre cases that stick out in my mind, but unforgettable things definitely come up. Whenever there's a young person on the table, it's sad. The degree of decomposition can lead to a lot of difficult nights, and the smell alone can really get to you. The thing that always spooks me though, is when I'm raising an axillary artery. The site we look at for is the area of direct distal, fingers away from the body mass to the armpit. The site that we look for is the area directly distal, towards fingers away from the body mass to the armpit. There are a lot of tendons and such in there. As well, when you're holding the person's arm up, digging around near the tendons, sometimes their arm will move. It happens a lot, but I still get momentarily terrified when some person grabs me out of nowhere. Other than that, there's not much more I can contribute to this. I know some secondhand stories from other people, but anything directly from me isn't too exciting. Okay, so I work at a hospital in my state, and all I do is move the patients and even the recently deceased to our morgue. I usually like to hang out in the stairwell, where I work whenever I have free time, or whenever I'm on lunch. My department is small, only about 4 of us on the night shift, from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Moving on from the details in the stairwell, you can hear every single sound that is made in there. It's a total of 12 stories, but only 11 stories are accessible to employees. Whenever I sit there, sometimes people come in and out from all over the stairwell to reach different floors, and the elevators are busy. Well, one night around 2:45 a.m., I was sitting on the 6th floor stairs and didn't hear any doors open above or below me, but the sound of footsteps echoed through the stairwell, and it wasn't quiet, like the sounds of boots stopping all the way down. It was like someone running or jumping down the steps, and it kept going all the way down to the 1st floor. Keep in mind, the 1st floor is where the morgue is, and to get inside, you need a key card. Only select few people have the proper key card to access the morgue, and I am one of those select few. I start to walk down the stairs to check to see if maybe the maintenance guy had just been screwing around or something. As I reach the 4th floor, I hear this swooshing and sound pass right through the small hole between all the floors, like if someone were to jump from the 12th floor all the way down. This naturally put me on more of an edge, and nonetheless I kept going down. Finally, I reached the 1st floor. I reached the 1st floor door, and when I go to pull it towards me, the door slams shut, and the footsteps come running down the stairs right up behind me, and when I turn, there's nothing there. Now, our hospital is always cold, but at the bottom of the stairwell, it felt like it was almost freezing. My entire body got goosebumps, and I just ran up to the next floor, and with each step I hit, it sounded like someone was right behind me, following me up to the next level. When I reached the door, I breathed out, and all I could see was my breath, and I started to shiver. I ended up getting the 2nd level door open, and running out into the hallway. When I looked back, I was alone in the hallway, and felt my body immediately warm up. Since then, I don't spend time in the stairwell. I spent some time picking up bodies for the medical examiner. There are many stories, some on my own and some of those who I worked with. One of which is usually pretty popular. It's that a woman who died on her own in the reservation town. We arrived and the cop on scene was quite disgusted with the place. He was looking forward to being deployed back to Afghanistan to get away from this town. The house when we arrived was an older house with several stories. The fence outside had been driven through by a car at some point. It was a night, of course. We entered the house and it was a complete mess. She was obviously a bit of a hoarder. I've seen much worse hoarders in this job, but she was on her way there. There was stuff piled everywhere. You couldn't tell where the floor was. It was covered with so much garbage and paper. Probably had hardwood floors underneath as it felt fairly solid, but tough to say for sure. The second floor was up a spiral staircase, and she was upstairs. Before we went up there, the cop told us that she had dogs that, got her a little bit. We worked our way up the spiral staircase to the door that he had indicated she was behind. When we opened the door, there was a body sitting in the office chair facing the door. However, it was a skull on the top of a body. The dogs had eaten off the skin on her head. They also ate her breasts, and the implants from her breasts were on the floor. She had several small dogs. They had started eating each other before her. So, there was bones from at least one or probably two dogs scattered around. She had died and was not able to feed the dogs, obviously, so they turned on each other and then her. The guy I was with started freaking out a little bit. It was a fairly disgusting sight, well beyond the average call that we went to. We were trying to figure out how to get her out of the chair. She was decomposed, of course, so she was covered in blisters that bodies get covered in as they decompose. We have to gather as much of the body as we can. So he grabbed her implants and what was left of her scalp and her hair all attached off the floor, and you don't want to pop those blisters if you can avoid it. They are very putrid when they leak out. In my partner's state of not knowing that, and not knowing what the hell to do with her, he decided the easiest way to get her out of the chair was to kick the chair out from under her. So he did. She came crashing down to the floor and the blisters burst. It was now a horrible mess of oozing pus. We had our portable stretcher, as obviously we are going to bring one with us, and we can't bring one with wheels up the spiral staircase. We don't generally bring that up staircases anyway. We set the body bag and loaded her in. Of course, some of the fluids and whatnot got on the outside of the body bag. We loaded her onto the stretcher and carried her out of the house. She stank up the minivan all the way back to the city. It was winter and quite cold out, but we have to drive with all the windows down to try to survive the putrid odor. So, some background info to start. I work as a security guard at a hospital. It's not a huge hospital. We have about 165 beds here. Anyway, my job involves many things other than simply watching CCTVs. However, this story involves one. So, our morgue is in the basement and can only hold 3 bodies at a time. I've heard many stories about spirits being seen or heard here, but I've only started 2 months ago and hadn't seen anything until last week. At around 5:10 p.m., my partner is doing his lockups, and I am watching the cameras. Out of boredom, I switched the camera down in the basement that is 360 degrees and can see 2 different hallways. I moved to the camera to look down the hall from where the morgue is, and noticed someone standing around the corner of another hall about 10 feet down the hall from the morgue door. As soon as I noticed them, it seems as if the person was staring directly at the camera. Within about 2 seconds of me noticing them, they backed off. I was slightly confused as the coroner. They were hiding to see if I could check again. The recordings from our camera show very different movement, and including panning and zooming, etc. The recording doesn't even show what I moved at all. and when we look back, we don't see anything on there. What are your thoughts? Was it a spirit or simply a worker who was taken to the emergency elevator? Let me know your thoughts. My coworkers think I most likely saw a ghost, as they've all had experiences here too. It was my birthday last year, and I was on call. I get a call at 3:30 a.m. that we have a residential death. Our medical examiner deputy called the funeral home and told us to bring reinforcements. I meet up with a coworker and we get to the house at about 30 minutes later. The medical examiner pulls up beside us and tells us the guy is in the basement. He's 6'8" and probably 300 pounds. So there's just 3 employees of the funeral home and our medical examiner at the house. By the grace of God, we get this guy onto our cot. But we have to try to get this guy up a flight of stairs. The 2 older guys come up the front, and I take up the back with my coworker. When you take a cot up a flight of stairs, and don't really know how hard it is to unroll when you get both sets of wheels on the stairs. The first 4 stairs go pretty well, but when we got the wheels back up, they're going to go up. I've dealt with large people in stairs before, but this was a whole different demon. There was really only enough room for 1 person on the stair, so I volunteered to try. We made it maybe 2 stairs before the body shifted on the cot and he started sliding back. We brought him back down and ended up calling the fire department. The fire department brought 10 guys. We tied off the cot and tried making it up the stairs again, but it just wasn't going to happen. The fire chief in my funeral home, they talked to the owner of the house, and we finally decided that we would come down with a saw and told us that we were going to make a door. We cut a hole in the side of the wall. We wheeled him out, and that was the end of that. One of the firefighters was a woodworker and came back the next day and fixed the wall in the basement. I showed up to the fire station that next day with 5 pizzas and a case of beer. I hope these stories gave you some nightmares tonight. If you enjoyed these stories, please leave this video a like and leave a comment down below suggesting what stories you'd like to hear next. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification button to never miss another video. I upload multiple videos similar to this one every single week. A man in South Africa awoke inside of a morgue chamber almost 24 hours after his family thought he had died. After the family called the undertaker to pick up his body and take it to the morgue, he spent nearly a whole day in freezing temperatures before he began yelling from within the chamber for help. Morgue workers were initially frightened as they thought the screams were coming from an ill-tempered ghost. "I couldn't believe it," Ayanda Makalo says. "I was also scared, but they are my employees and I had to show them that I wasn't scared, so I called the police, because Ghostbusters protocol packs are low in supply in South Africa." The police came armed with firearms, instead ready to shoot whatever came out of the chamber, be it man or mist. The man emerged and was taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation, then later discharged. He later reported that he still suffers from nightmares due to the traumatic experience. The South African Health Department spokesperson urged South Africans to call their health officials to confirm whether their loved ones are truly dead. The man's family, however, was thrilled to discover that instead of the man's being dead, they were going to do a welcome back party. All in all, how freaky would it be if you were in a deep sleep and your family thought you were dead and sent you off to be embalmed and have your body drained of all its blood? Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good night and enjoy these nightmares.